Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing Iron Edge Group webisode. Today, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity insurance because everybody needs it, and it's incredibly difficult to fill out the form to get it. So we're really excited about this. It's honestly something quite a few of our clients have come to us about to discuss. It's something that we spend a considerable amount of our account management time doing, helping out with the cyber insurance surveys and applications. So, and something that's changed dramatically over the last couple of years, to be honest with you. So I want to introduce you quickly to our fabulous panel of folks. We've got me. My name is Andrew Moore. I'm the COO of Iron Edge Group. And I am kind of our Sherpa on the journey today, really going to leave this in the capable hands of both Ruben and Patrick. Ruben Lambrana has been with the Iron Edge Group for over 7 years, and he has been in IT management, consulting, and services for over 20 years. And he's one of our vice presidents in the Houston market, manages some of our larger accounts in Texas. And Patrick Maese, who has helped to spearhead the foundation of some of our security services and consultancy around compliance, and works out of our San Antonio market as a vice president, and is also responsible for some of our largest clients in the Texas market as well. So I welcome the both of them to this discussion.
The dream team, right? We have the dream team. Well, hold on. It's either seasoned veterans or old rusty IT dudes that may not know much anymore. Which one is it?
I think honestly, like it's like with y'all like look better with age. I just look like an old version of the guy in the picture. So
well, we count the gray hairs, and that's how smart we are in IT.
Yeah. When you said 20 years, I think you're underselling it. I'm the old crusty guy that's been around for a long time.
How long has it been? I'm giving you 20, 25 years.
Yeah, it's about 25 years, I would guess.
Yeah. And Patrick's been with the company now for 13 years, and he's got about 20 years experience.
Yeah. So collectively, we're a smart bunch, I would think.
Smart or cunning. We're able to get out of trouble. So let's hop into it a little bit, right? So one of the things we do want to talk about is the cost and the likelihood of a breach. And one of the things we did want to discuss with everybody here is that it's actually going to happen. Like your company will probably be breached. There's a pretty high likelihood it's going to happen. And there is a cost associated with that. And we've seen that with people we've been asked to come in and talk to. We've seen that with some clients where there was a breach. And I just do want to talk a little bit about what that looks like from a likelihood perspective, from a cost perspective, from a sector perspective, because a lot of the times people come back and say, well, I'm a small business. Nobody is really interested in my company. Nobody's going to attack me. And so, Patrick, where's the fallacy in that? Like
so it's interesting, right? So obviously in certain industries, for example, the medical industry, you have health information, PHI information. In retail, you have credit card information. And different industries have different types of data that are, hot on the black market, right? If you can take information that's in any of those industries, you can take it and resell it amongst the black market. And where it gets, where you get yourself in trouble is if you're not part of these markets that have very specific information, you have the fallacy that says, my information, my data is not important to the world, right? And that's where you can get yourself in trouble, simply because the data that you have in your environment is important to your business. And the bad guys, the bad actors know that. And so it's not necessarily getting into your environment and stealing information and trying to sell it. That is obviously one method. But two, a big attack vector is ransomware, right? They know that if they're able to get into your environment and just lock your information and data away from you that you need to do business, that's a gold mine for them, right? They cryptoware your data, and you're handcuffed to them, right? They want you to pay them to unlock all that data.
Well,
So,
and let me jump in on that, Ruben. Like, I know you've seen it before where you've had clients that have been breached, or you've worked on the sales side with us, you know, on when someone's come to us and say, hey, I've been breached, I need some help, because they're not happy with their current IT position. From a cost perspective, what's the range you've seen in like what a client is out when it comes to either what they have to pay in, you know, crypto or green packs or whether to get their stuff unlocked, or what they've lost in transferring, you know, money to an organization that wasn't the intended recipient, what they've had to pay in forensics fees? Like, kind of, can you give us some idea of what you've seen in regards to what that looks like?
Sure. Before I jump into that, I just wanted to, kind of relay that most everybody thinks this isn't going to happen to me. And I've had clients that have told me that they don't expect it to happen to them, and nobody really expects it. But the likelihood is really high, as you mentioned before, especially in the current climate. In 2021, we saw about 50% more attacks than we did in 2020. And there were some high profile attacks, like with the Microsoft vulnerability on Exchange. We saw Facebook data breach. The Colonial Pipeline was a highly publicized one. The JBS meat processor ransomware attack, that was a big one that affected supply of meat and chicken. Kaseya had an attack. And toward the end of last year, we saw the Log4j vulnerability that really opened up a lot of new targets for the bad actors, right? And out of those attacks, you see that almost half of them, in the high 40% of those attacks, are aimed at small and medium businesses. And despite this, 83% was a figure I recently read. 83% of the small businesses are not financially prepared to recover from such a cyber attack. And despite all those numbers, over 90% of small businesses do not have any cyber liability insurance. So as the clients think this isn't going to happen to me, more and more they're seeing it happen to them. Some of the common things that I've seen were email compromises, where somebody really tracks and they phish a user, typically in the financial section of the business. And by doing that, they're able to compromise their email account. They get a phishing attack. They enter their credentials into a bad actor's website. Those credentials are then captured, and the bad actor will watch those emails and they'll jump in on a thread and intercept something, have them change an account number so that ACH or other payments go to the wrong place, go into their accounts. I've seen, as far as numbers go, I've recently seen over a $3 million transaction take place, $1.2 million transaction take place, and those were all related to email compromises.
And that comes back to like kind of a lack of governance too, but it's not just like the cost on the IT side for the infrastructure. The things that we're seeing are not just the cost of the remediation, right? But not having some sort of governance or process in place could actually result in losses to the business, as not just having their stuff encrypted, but losses due to lack of governance in money being transferred to the wrong place, right?
Absolutely. And it's not a problem that's always solved with technology. Technology can only do so much, but even the cybersecurity applications that we're seeing are asking about processes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say application, one of the things we do want to talk about, we're going to get into some more depth here. We're going to use the word application, and you might hear us throw it around a little bit. Our focus on application might be geared towards, we'll try to be specific about it, the actual document that you are required to fill out as a business in order to apply for cybersecurity insurance. But it also might apply to, and we'll try to be specific about it, a software application used in order to help mitigate or prevent risk when it comes to security. So Patrick, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, to kind of pull it back to the insurance policies, right? So there's some very real hard costs that are involved in loss from a cybersecurity attack, whether that's the downtime to your organization or actual transfer of funds, right? And so cybersecurity insurance is there to help cover some of those costs. But from an insurance provider perspective, they've become a lot more rigorous in how they determine how much you're doing on your side to protect that environment and that data. What the point is that in the past, a lot of the questions that were part of an insurance application were very generic, right? They didn't get into much of the details, but what was happening was that a lot of organizations were becoming subject to these attacks and losing money. And so really the providers have to have become more granular in their way that they're asking these questions of what technologies and processes that you're using, because at this point, it's so prevalent that being negligent on your security in your environment is not enough for a provider these days to write a policy on cybersecurity insurance.
And what we've noticed too is before, insurance companies would kind of give out like blanket $1 million policies, right? Like, oh, you're covered up to $1 million. And a lot of organizations are like, $1 million, that sounds like plenty of money. Like, what we're finding is that even when companies that are smaller are dealing with the cost of cybersecurity breaches, that in some cases, in order for the policy simply to pay out, a forensic audit has to happen immediately following the breach, where those groups that are brought in to look at the technology infrastructure can charge anywhere between $20,000 and $50,000 just to walk in the door. Then you're talking about any additional charges outside of that, which could reach well into the six-figure mark. And then, as Ruben had discussed, losses, which could be from simple data transference to loss of business, to having to provide for your employees or your clients certain levels of credit checking, policies and things of that nature over a specific period of time, depending on what type of breach it was and what overall state or federal law that you fall under, whether that's, in New York, the SHIELD Act, or, data governance protection acts that you'll see out in California. And a lot of other states are adopting these consumer and B2B protection policies that are putting in place in order to force organizations to take a more proactive stance, which is costing them money and therefore putting a lot of downward pressure on the insurance industry in order to make sure that they're not paying out these huge sums to mitigate the company's decision not to move forward with protection. And we're seeing this across all industries, right? And for those of you who aren't familiar, you'll notice on your credit cards, you've got, chips now on all of them. And, some places have the chip, some are still the swipe, some require a PIN, some you can do tap. A lot of that came back down to banks and credit card companies didn't want to have to pay out fraudulent check card charges, right? Because a retailer was using inadequate security protocols on their online banking platforms or on their brick and mortar card swiping system, or didn't have adequate controls in place to protect the storage and use of credit card information, where they used to have old school swipe systems, right, without any controls in place for destroying those carbon copies of your old credit cards and things like that. And so you see that industry has pushed down these new technologies and regulatory requirements to the retailers and then down to the consumer. You're seeing that now when it comes to cyber insurance. These insurance companies are no longer going to allow companies to just operate without any sort of stringent controls and policies that are in place in regards to how they're managing their IT governance and security at a business level. And you're seeing it across the board.
I'm going to drive that point home in your analogy or your comparison to the retail site with credit cards. there was a liability shift from the banks to the merchants, right, to the customer. And they were saying, look, guys, if you're not going to do this security stuff, then you guys are on the hook if something bad happens, right? And that's essentially what, the insurance providers are shifting to, is like, if you're not going to do your due diligence from a security standpoint, then the liability is on you. We're not going to pay out, what your policy says.
And that brings us kind of to the next thing that everybody's like, well, okay, now we understand it's expensive, right, for insurance companies. And if you don't take this stuff seriously, it is a gamble. Some companies are willing to take that risk. I can tell you, by working with certain clients who have taken that risk and wound up having to pay, they're sorry they did. And to give you the flip side of it before we get completely into this slide, just to touch on this, if you are proactively spending money on your cybersecurity, if you do have a cyber policy in place, typically your costs will go down on that policy. If you are taking the risk off of the insurance company, your rates won't be that high. You'll be able to shift that cost into proactive security technologies and processes, and shift it away from just straight risk management when it comes to the cybersecurity insurance, right? But
And Andrew, in some cases, the insurance companies are flat out denying the application, and they're not bringing you into their coverage because you don't have some of these things in place. So it's not just a lower rate, it's you just get completely denied. So there's some things that really need to take place in order to get insurance.
And it's funny, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's something we talked about in our pregame about this last week when we were getting ready for this webisode. Was before, and it was interesting that Ruben, you brought it up, I believe, and you had repeatedly called them cybersecurity insurance surveys. And then we were looking at some of the ones that we had been filling out for some of our clients so that we could maybe de-identify those and kind of bring up some examples of things that people are asking for. And what we found is that in the past, they were called surveys, just basically a questionnaire. Now they're called applications, like specifically, and that's what we touched on a minute ago. And that means that, like, in an application, there's a potential that you could be denied, right? You are asking for something, right? And they're looking for information in order to approve you or to rate you in some way, right? So I think that's a really important point to bring up, is that these applications are now applications. They're not just, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, sounds good. They're actually saying, are you doing this? And if you're not, they will say, listen, if you don't do this, then you're not getting cyber insurance. And in some instances we have heard of, there are loan committees that are denying banking, like business loans, based on the fact that the companies do not fulfill the basics when it comes to cybersecurity, because if they lend this company money and the company is compromised in some way, they may not be able to pay it back. So this goes just beyond whether or not you actually have insurance as a risk. This could potentially prevent you from being able to grow as a company if you needed a loan.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's happening on B2B vendor contracts, and they're asking these questions when you're doing business with other businesses, because they want to know if you're protecting their data and vice versa.
So it may prevent you from gaining revenue because you can't get a contract that you want. It may prevent you from getting insurance, which sucks because that's a risk problem in the event that you have a problem. And it might prevent you from being able to grow by being able to receive loans, right? Just by not taking these preventative measures. And in the event that you're compromised, it might actually, if you don't have insurance, cripple your business. And so it's hard, right? So, we understand that we've mentioned all the things that make this important and what's going on. And security is hard because it's ever changing. What we're seeing today isn't what we saw last year, and what we're seeing last year wasn't what we saw 5 years ago. We talked briefly, I remember the first networked server infrastructure I ever installed was Windows 2000. It's either NT4 or 2000, I can't remember which one, but we interconnected all the computers, we loaded them together, they started to communicate. We recommended that they put antivirus on the computers because at least one of those computers was attached to the internet. And they said, no, that's okay, we don't need antivirus. Nobody's going to try to give us a virus. There's no reason for you to have it. And I think that that's just kind of the ever evolving standpoint that people have when it comes to business technology, is they keep thinking, well, it's like, I'm too small a fish, they're not going to mess with me. And the methods by which they're trying to infiltrate your network, whether that's social engineering, whether that's actual like finding vulnerabilities in your network with 0 days, whether that's brute force trying to hack your systems, all of those things mean that at any given moment, you've got 30 different attack vectors that could happen with your organization. And you have to try to not only protect yourself from those, but also mitigate the risk that involves with the eventuality of a breach from one of those attack vectors. And it's hard and it's constantly evolving. Like I know Ruben probably has, you're probably having a very different conversations with every single client that you have regarding what their security position is and why it's important, and the difference between 90-day password management policies and MFA, right? And how that's even changed in the last year.
Right. And, as I mentioned, I had a client who we had made those recommendations. We had made several recommendations, and they were slow to accept those recommendations and implement them. And they got breached. And when I called to check on them, the first thing my point of contact said was, "You called it. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" It's like, "Yeah, I told you. You need to do this." And it's the attacks are so common now that you've got to have these things in place.
It's honestly like wearing a seatbelt. Like eventually you're going to get into an accident. It's going to happen at some point, right? It's just making sure that you're mitigating that risk. And it could be a severe accident, it could be a fender bender, but having those safety protocols in place, whether that's airbag, seatbelt, whatever, those are things that you would never think twice about wanting to have in place anymore. You know that they're not going to be something that you're going to use every day, and that 10 years ago maybe airbags seemed like they were an expensive luxury, but now everybody has them in their cars, right? And people don't even think about paying the extra cost to have those safety protocols in their cars. The same thing goes with your business, right? These safety protocols are things that you need to have in place in order to mitigate your risk. And so it's hard because it's ever changing and it's every day, and there's constantly something new. And these people who are trying to hack into your systems or to gain control of your infrastructure treat this as a business. And every day they show up and they go to work and they troll LinkedIn and they troll the internet to try to find people that they can compromise. They try to look on the dark web for passwords. They scan your environments constantly for vulnerabilities. And when they see something, they try to take advantage of it, and they just pound at it until they get in. And so if you're not as diligent on your side as they are on theirs, you run the risk of potentially being compromised. And so that's why it's hard.
So because it's so hard, Andrew, how does a business figure out where to start? Like at what point? I mean, how much security, how much do you spend on that? What does it look like to start if you don't have anything? Like really, how do you go down a road to get to a point where security is up to snuff with regards to either your industry and or your cybersecurity insurance policy?
That's a awesome segue, Patrick, as if you were a professional, like online video guy. The framework and business processes, I think, are critical. And one of the things that you have helped this company with in particular over the last few years is just understanding how we have changed as an organization, in that we now have a firm grasp of saying that there are certain types of frameworks that fit certain types of industries, right? And whether you're doing business with Department of Defense folks, where you have to have CMMC as your framework, or you're banking or credit union where you're using the FDIC protocols that are in place, or you're using FINRA if you're doing money management or marketing. There are different frameworks for different types of HIPAA for medical. So there are a lot of different frameworks that you can use. And the good news is there's a framework that everybody can use if they don't have one that's specifically for their industry, which is the NIST framework. And it's one that we all really like because it gives us a baseline, and it's kind of the one that all other frameworks are built off of.
Yeah, really, the first step that you would do as an organization is, in the industry that you have, see if you have any sort of regulation or governance that is dictated in that space that you work in, right? Financial, medical, retail. There's typically, in an industry, has some sort of recommendations or guidance or requirements that you should follow to be part of that industry, right? Now, if you don't have that, and if you're just a private company, a small, medium-sized business that doesn't have that sort of governance, that's where that comes in, this cybersecurity framework that NIST provides as a way of building a security program for your organization. If you don't have something to lean on, then NIST is a great framework for you guys to get started on. It's generic in a way that you can mold it to your organization's needs. And that's why, if you don't have something to lean on, like a governance or regulation in industry, the NIST CSF or cybersecurity framework is a great place to start. It obviously requires a little bit of homework to understand what it's all about, but it's really just a framework to start building a security program around.
Patrick, I've recently seen some of the insurance companies are using the NIST framework as part of the application process.
Yeah, it's really challenging, is because there's not a one size fits all for any industry or any company, right? The NIST one is great because you can mold it, but because there's not a specific requirement for every business and from an insurance provider, as long as you're doing something, if you're adopting the NIST CSF, it covers everything, right? You can use that as your building program to say, if a company with a contract is asking these questions, or if your insurance providers are asking these questions, it's all in that framework that you can use to get started, right?
And what I want to make sure that we touch on is, we're going to get into the application components here in just one more slide, but one of the things I do want to touch on is something that we talked about briefly when it comes to the framework and the processes. Is that is really the meat and potatoes of any cyber policy that you have, any cybersecurity process or program that you have. Sorry, the program itself is mostly built around these governance and processes and procedures. The software is honestly an important but small part of the actual program that's being built out. And we would be, as a technology company, remiss to not talk about software guidance and features, but software guidance and the features that come with it really kind of fall in line with what your framework is going to require of you and how that fits into the governance and processes that are built as part of the program. And so those software, systems could be any number of features that come within an application stack, whether that's a piece of installed software or software as a service. Like Patrick, as an example, I know that we deal with the difference between Office 365 and GCC High when it comes to Office 365. And those are two separate software solutions, but they have completely different feature sets. That one may work for NIST or even FDIC compliance in O365 with certain lockdown parameters, but GCC High is specific to like CMMC and DoD regulations. Right.
Yeah, well, a lot of the GCC High, the DoD space, is the way that they run and maintain a lot of the data and who accesses it, right? That's more in the government space with regards to the technology and the amount of security they put around the infrastructure. I think the biggest takeaway is that, a lot of companies think that the security tools and technology is enough to secure their environment, which, to your point, is it's a small factor of the overall big picture, because business processes is such a critical component of a mature security program that's often overlooked. Because you can spend $1 million on technology and software security and all this type of tech that you put in place, But if someone, picks up a phone and calls, your accounting department and socially engineers them to transfer $100,000 and there's no business process to protect that, then all of the money that you spent on technology is not going to, it's not going to save you that exploit, right? It's not going to save you from losing that money.
But
Right.
also,
And you can have all those protections in place and still have one of your partners or one of your vendors get compromised, and then they're sending you incorrect account information or there's suspicious activity that happens from your partners, and you end up getting taking a financial loss because of something your partner or one of your vendors did, even though you had all these technical security things in place, right?
it's so true. And just before we get into the actual application process itself, just remember, from a security software perspective, not all software and services are created equal. And what you want to do is make sure you're working directly with your IT professionals to understand the difference between certain types of antivirus, certain types of detection and response, certain overlays when it comes to those software applications. Because when we get into the application process, you'll see, and Ruben will touch on this here in a second, is in a lot of these applications, they're asking for and have drop downs in these applications for very specific pieces of software that they find to be acceptable from a risk standpoint. So make sure that, as you've decided on your framework and you're beginning to look at your options when it comes to these pieces of software, they're going to help protect your network and help you fall into a more risk tolerant position for your insurance policy. You're going to want to make sure that you're using things that are industry standard, that are acceptable from a risk perspective for your actuaries, and that are actually going to protect your business instead of just throwing money away. And so kind of brings us to the idea of what is in the application for a cybersecurity policy, right? And so what we're seeing is that clients are coming to us needing some help in filling this out. And what we've also seen is that we've had folks in the past, and they may not be our clients, but we'll just say we've heard of this happening, where somebody in the organization will get the cybersecurity insurance policy application and they just click yes on everything because they assume it's all being done. Does that sound familiar, guys?
Absolutely.
Well, I'll take it one further, is that oftentimes in the past, your HR department or whoever's going through the insurance renewal process didn't need to know a lot about the technology side, right? They didn't need to be IT people. The policy and application process today is so specific, and it calls out very specific technologies and security products that it's almost impossible to not involve a technical person, whether that's an internal IT personnel, a CIO, or an external MSP that can help you through that process. The questions are very, very technical to answer. And so it's almost impossible in this day and age to answer these questions without having some sort of technical background or knowledge in the industry.
And this is an example that we have here of just some of the questions that are going to be asked. We've got a couple more of these slides we'll go through. But you can see here some of the questions that they're asking when it comes to FPF, SPF records is an example here on our fourth question. I don't know how many non-technical people would be able to answer whether or not there's an SPF system in place when it comes to validating emails, when it comes to DNS, right? I don't know, how many people would know whether or not Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection has been enabled, right? Without actually getting in and looking at it. Are you guys finding that these kind of questions, even from an account management standpoint, you're having to go back and talk to our technical leads, or like, how do these typically work when you start filling these out?
I'll give you a funny story. Oftentimes, what we find is that some companies will go through this process and not involve IT in any way, shape, or form. And suddenly we get wind of it saying, oh yeah, we have, an SPF record in place, and IT's like, oh, we do? It's like, no one's really doing that. No one's aware that we should be doing these sorts of things. And none of that is we'll get to an adherence part, but IT is often maybe the last people to know that they should be doing this to adhere to a policy, right? And if what the point is that if you're saying you are doing something as part of your policy, you need to be practicing that in your environment. Otherwise, when something happens and they come and do an audit and they say, oh, no, you're not, you said yes on your SPF record, but you don't actually have something, that absolves them from responsibility, and they'll walk away from that policy. They won't pay out anything on that policy, right? So having these questions answered yes, and also making sure that they're being done in the day-to-day maintenance of the environment and the adherence of that is critical to make sure that you're doing what your policy is asking you to do.
Yeah, Andrew mentioned the car insurance as an example, and if you look at a car insurance application and you're checking, yes, I have airbags, yes, I have anti-lock brakes, yes, I have an anti-theft system, and you have a claim and you don't have one of those things, just like you said, they're going to deny it, and that's what's happening here. And one of the questions I see here on this screenshot here is the phishing training. So security awareness training is critical to ensuring that your users are not phished, are not tricked into doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So that's something that's important.
And it's something that is like, there's kind of like there's a set of absolute must-haves when it comes to some of these cyber policies. And, you're starting to see more of next generation antivirus, advanced endpoint detection and response, end user security training. These are all things that used to, before, we found were more like mid-market enterprise level requirements. And now they're really being pushed down to all businesses, that these things be put in place in order to make sure that these policies can be paid out effectively. And they're asking all sorts of really interesting questions on these, right? Like the security and email controls. Again, here we see SPF, DKIM, asking whether or not you can get to web systems and email through non-corporate devices, right? Like there are so many companies out there that have this, it was all the rage. And I know that even some companies still do, BYOD, bring your own device. If you're one of those companies, please be aware of the fact, one of the things that's changed dramatically since the beginning of the pandemic is this hybrid workforce and people working with laptops, and maybe they're able to access their systems from outside their environment. And maybe at the time, 2 years ago, you had a bunch of physical desktops and people were like, well, I can just remote in from home and I'll use my own personal device. And that was okay for a few months. We'll even say maybe a year. I'm not going to go that far, but let's just say at some point your organization your business processes have changed. You need to look at your security and make sure that it still lines up with not only the security of your data, but does it still line up with your security policies when it comes to your cyber insurance application, right? If you're allowing people to remotely access their stuff from home, are you issuing them a corporate device that has encryption on it, that uses multi-factor authentication, all those things, in order to secure the device and be compliant? Because if they find out that you didn't, and you're allowing people to remote in from home on their personal computers, and there's no multi-factor in place or encryption on any of the data or any of those data loss prevention protocols in place, then you're out of compliance. And if that's where the breach occurred, when they run a forensic audit, depending on the payout that you're asking for, they're going to get to the bottom of where the breach happened. So you can't just skirt this. They're not going to be like, you're like, give me my $1 million. And they'll be like, cool, here's your $1 million. Like, they're going to be like, awesome. This needs to get locked down, right? They treat it like a crime scene, which is why what we strongly recommend is, in the event of one of these breaches, if it's significant and you believe that there's going to be a claim, right after you contact your IT provider and put them on notice, everybody needs to hold for just a brief couple of minutes while you contact your insurance company and possibly your lawyer. And everybody needs to be aware of what just happened, because people are going to start talking about suing each other. People are going to start talking about insurance payouts, and the crime scene has to be pristine in order for people to make sure that nothing was tampered with. So all of these things come together when it comes to the security policy, because you need to know what people are doing, how they have things locked down, everything, all the business processes and programs have to line up with what you told the insurance companies. And you have to follow that process in response. So you'll see here, there's some other areas where they're asking more about the email and external things that are happening with your systems. But then here's the one that I like that, Ruben brought to us, is really getting into some of the very specific, very technical things that happen outside of just email on your environment, right? And Ruben, you brought this to our attention here as some of the things they're asking for in this EDR and EPP question, right?
Right, and this is not something that was common even a year or two ago. This is all new technology that, new to the small, medium business world, that they're now asking about and looking for these tools or similar tools.
You look here, they're bringing a very specific technology that they're asking for, right? These pieces of software, right, are going to potentially grade you on risk, right? Just having, let's say, Panda Security versus SentinelOne might be a difference in pricing when it comes to your policy, because of one being more enterprise than the other, right? Or having more feature-rich tools that provide for a more secure environment. Asking for things like DNS protection, looking at and asking for enterprise vulnerability scanning solutions, right? Like vulnerability scanning and vulnerability management falls outside of just standard Microsoft patch management. Like, how often are you looking at the firmware on your devices to make sure that they've been up to date, right? How often are you dealing with things such as awareness when it comes to potential issues, right? Are you working with a company, or does your internal IT team work with information that's being provided to it from outside organizations, informing it of potential vulnerabilities and being able to get in front of it? We've had a few folks that we were in the sales process working with during the Log4j system breach. And we reached out to them and said, hey, by the way, like, we've already scanned your environment as part of this potential sales engagement that we've been working on with you. And we know for a fact that you have this vulnerability. Has your current provider informed you of it? And they had not, because they weren't actually actively monitoring those channels to see if there were vulnerabilities that were out there that they should inform their clients of. So you need to ask these questions of your IT team and your provider and make sure that you're answering these honestly. And if you're not, you need to be developing a program to mitigate these risks. This comes back to phishing simulation, which Ruben talked about. This is a big deal. I would say, Ruben, a majority of the issues that we've seen with our potential clients and our current clients are the ones that have been around being socially engineered, right?
Yes, either they were socially engineered, or one of their vendors or partners was socially engineered. And that's where these processes come into place that they're asking about. Does your wire transfer authorization process include the following? And they've got a list of things that it should include, right?
This is not technology. There is nothing IT about what they are just asking for here. This is all governance and control. There's no way to fix this with, I mean, I guess you could have like some sort of like applicate, like some sort of like form that you fill out every time. But I mean, still, this is literally like, this is just training people to do a process.
Well, one of the great things about these questions is it asks the questions of yourself, right, of the organization. If you start going through this stuff and you're saying no, 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 or at least I didn't even think about doing this, this is a great place to start implementing it in your environment. Like, if I'm saying no to this, is this something I should be doing? More than likely, the answer is yes. But it's a great place to start, certainly going back to, how do I start, securing my environment? If I'm going through these questions and a lot of this stuff I'm not doing, this is a great place to start to use this as a governance to to apply these controls to your environment, to apply these technologies and processes so that you are doing these things. Now, a lot of these application questions aren't necessarily a requirement. Some of them are, but a lot of times they're asking a lot of these questions just to see how mature you are. But it's a great place to start to say, let's take this, and we know this is important. Let's implement this into our own environment.
Yep. And some of these I would even take a step further, and some of them might, depending on your application. Like question 5A here says, how often does your organization perform backups? I've had plenty of people that we've worked with in the past, right? Clients or, people that came on as clients were like, we back everything up nightly. And the first question I asked was, look, when was the last time you did a test restore? If you're not test restoring your data, then your data isn't backed up. That's not a backup. That's a process by which data is copied somewhere, but test restoring actually confirms the validity of the backup. That's an actual business continuity and security function by having the backups restored from testing purposes. So,
and I have seen applications that ask how often you do a test restore.
Doesn't surprise me. I think that's a critical question. Again, you see here other questions on different applications are asking specifically for endpoint detection and response, right? This is a totally different application that we're providing here, which talks about the same thing one of the other applications was asking, right? Do you record and track software and assets, right? These are all just program and process systems on top of the actual software applications that are running. So you're seeing that they're kind of coming more and more together. And until there's some sort of federal regulation on how IT security should be handled, at least at a baseline for businesses, the free market is going to dictate how people are managing this sort of risk. And a lot of it's going to come back to the insurance carriers, or are beginning to get more and more aligned with one another and what they're looking for, right? And asking kind of what the general health of your organization is from a technology standpoint, because everything's running off the internet. Everything's running in the environment. So now that we've kind of looked at all of that, right? The question is, now that we've, decided that we've done these things and we've put them in place, how do we make sure it's happening? And what do we do to ensure that our risk is managed? And now that we've answered these questions, and let's say we've all answered them in a way that we can all be very proud of, right? So on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis, what are the things that we're doing, Ruben, that you from our organization, that you see our clients doing, or you're seeing out in the industry where people are adhering to these things and building governance around this? What are people doing? What are companies doing?
One of the things, and it's evident by some of the questions that the insurance companies are asking around processes and security awareness training, is that many times people are the weakest link in your security, and people are the ones that are getting tricked into allowing the bad actors into the environment. And you can have all the security that you want in place, but if people don't know what to look for, they're going to fall for something.
So the governance comes back to just making sure that you're following up with everyone and training people across the board about why security is important, and even when you're dealing with physical security type stuff, which people certainly, a lot of companies don't necessarily equate to being a technology solution, but it does have something to do with you need to teach people be aware that you don't let people trail you into the building, right? And make sure that secure, locations, doors close behind you, and just make sure that you're doing those things. People need to be aware that there's a digital equivalent to that when it comes to where did the email come from. It's up to you to make sure that it looks like it's from a legit source. And if you got a text from somebody that looks like your boss, that you've got a process by which you check that, right? There's all that stuff when it comes back to that sort of adherence, right? And Patrick has seen it when it comes back to the governance part of it, actually building a program.
Sure. So adherence is an interesting topic too, because you can say, for example, we'll take MFA, for example. You can say on your application process that you're enabling MFA. Fast forward 6 months down the line, and suddenly the maintenance of your environment, half your people have MFA on, half of them don't. And that's part of just kind of managing and adhering to, what you said to the policy provider, what you're doing in that environment. So making sure that it's being maintained, it's being adhered to. Otherwise, if a breach happens and they go in there and they say, oh, well, only half of your people have MFA on, then again, they're just going to they're not going to pay that policy. Right. So adhering to what you're telling the insurance provider is critical, to make sure that as you go through the year and every annual time, because it's going to change every year, but throughout that process, that you're maintaining your environment, you're maintaining your backups, you're maintaining all the technology that you're putting in place, and you're making sure that it works properly. Otherwise, it's all for naught.
Well, and one of the things that I'll say that I've seen, which is interesting, we hear a lot when it comes to board level mandates, or ownership says we need to do this, or hey, we got this insurance thing and we get this filled out, and then we'll come back as a company and say, okay, well, here are the things that you as an organization need to do in order to be more secure. This is how you're going to be compliant with whatever your regulatory industry says you need to do, or in order to get this contract, or in order to honestly fill out this insurance policy. And what we'll find is that sometimes the organization itself knows it needs to do it, but from a top down, there are certain people at the C-suite or at the ownership level or whatever that's like, look, MFA is great for everybody but me. And that's hard because I don't want to do it. And so that adherence, in order for a company to really be successful in managing a security program, has to be a top-down approach. And it has to come from everybody at the top, because typically what we've seen is when it happens that those people in an organization, whether they're a partner or an owner or part of the C-suite, don't adhere to the same security policies and processes they've asked everybody else to, I guarantee you, more than half of the time that we wind up seeing a breach in an organization, it is one of those C-suite people that are breached, that did not adhere to the same policies and processes that the rest of the organization was required to. And at that point, suddenly everything changes, and now they actually implement all of the policies across the board for everybody. And so what we really want to stress to everybody is IT security has to become a program that is a part of everything that a company does everywhere. And it can't be just something that only happens on the sales side or only happens at execution or operations. Like, it has to come from the top down, and everybody has to do it the same way. And yeah, it's hard to do IT, or it takes time to, it's not hard. It takes time to do your security phishing training. It takes time. And if you're a busy executive, like, it's hard to find time to do that, but you have to do it. And you got to take the time. Yeah. Logging in using multi-factor authentication takes a little longer, but you know what? As somebody that's in charge or in control of, or has the ability to move things at a much different pace within an organization, you're a target. You're a big target. And it would be a lot easier to get into your systems and to take advantage of you, they could do a lot more damage that way. And it also damages the rest of the organization's view of how the security systems work if the senior management team isn't willing to do the same thing that the people down level are doing. They don't take it as seriously. And so we really strongly advise everybody to do that.
Yeah, and don't become complacent. Just like Patrick said with the maintenance, you've got to maintain this adherence, because many times I've seen, as a result of an application, or as a result of a compromise or a breach, where a company will, everything's priority now, let's do all the security stuff, let's get it all in place. And then once the event dies down, they don't maintain it, and they become lackluster, and then they're vulnerable again, right?
And we always say this, right? Like, we say it with backups, and we say it with security too. Doing a backup project does not mean that you have good backups. Backups are a program, right? Not like a technology, like an actual like program. Like, there's a cadence to it, and that you test it and you review it and you confirm that everything is working on a regular basis. And the same thing with security. We don't like to do security projects. our organization strongly urges companies to kick off security programs. And those can have projects within them, but they're part of a program and part of something that's managed as a program. Now, you can have an outside firm help manage that program with you as an organization, or you can try to manage it internally. But what I will tell every single one of our clients and potential clients is that you should never expect, nor should you accept an outside party telling you that they're going to run your security program for you. When it comes to business compliance, when it comes to security, when it comes to all those things, any outside vendor or party or people are going to have absolutely no responsibility long-term when it comes to the success of that program. Like if you are compromised and you go, well, my IT partner told me that they were doing this, the insurance company doesn't care. Their policy is with you, and the attestation you made was that you and your company were doing these things. So it is ultimately the responsibility of the business to make sure that these things are being done, they're being followed through with, and that they're being implemented on a governance side as well as a technology side. So we strongly encourage all companies to know, for every hour that you're going to spend with an IT provider doing kind of a next level security program, expect to spend about an hour on your side, right? If you're going to sit down and help write a policy, it's your policy. You can get guidance, right? Think of it like your tax returns, right? Like, the government's ultimately going to ask you why the taxes were wrong. It's your responsibility if you used a shoddy accountant to do it, right? So you really need to be on top of this stuff and ask these questions and be prepared. And so it's an important aspect of security to know that the adherence and governance is well beyond just the project to implement these technologies. Was there anything that we wanted to follow up with, Ruben? Was there anything that you wanted to mention before we closed up here today? Or did we cover everything on your plan?
No, I think we've covered everything that I had in mind.
Awesome. Patrick, what about you? Is there anything we wanted to wind down with that we didn't hit on?
Yeah, I mean, to wrap it up, it's, security is an ever evolving and ever changing environment, right? And so it's not like you can put in a technology solution and walk away and say you're done with security. You got to stay on top of it, because the bad guys out there, they're not resting on their laurels. So you have to maintain and build that program, continue on it. It's a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month process, right? And if you get behind on it, then you're not gonna get a cyber insurance policy. You're not gonna get a business-to-business contract, and ultimately you'll be you'll be compromised for sure.
And if you think you're not a target, you're wrong.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Well, I want to thank my panel today. Ruben and Patrick did an amazing job of helping us walk through some really weird and interesting things when it comes to cybersecurity. If you have any questions or concerns about your policies, feel free to reach out to the Iron Edge group. We appreciate your time and thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the like button on this. And we'll talk to you at our next webinar. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.